Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video, I'm going to be reviewing Another Crab's Treasure. Believe it or not, this is actually a Souls-like game about a crab and a little bit of his journey or so. Anyways, this is a really fun game. We're going to talk about it in detail. I'm going to give it a review at the end, and honestly, I can't wait to jump into this one. So I'm not going to jump into the story too much because the dialogue's just okay, and the story so far is pretty basic. Now, the actual game itself, though, the gameplay is really good. The regular enemies are challenging, there's mini bosses that are challenging, and then there's, of course, tough boss fights, some of which have 2 phases. It basically checks all the marks that you would want for a Souls-like game, and then there's something interesting I want to talk about thematically throughout this game too, because it's very interesting in the sense that it's challenging, but somehow relaxing too. Now, leveling is pretty simple. I'm about at the mid-game now. I've probably got 6-8 hours into this game, and leveling up, you have 4 different attributes to level up. You have Vitality, Resistance, Attack, and then your Special Attack. There is no difference here compared to other Souls-likes and Souls games themselves. You want to level Vitality and Health first to make your life a lot easier because the more HP and hits you could take, the more forgiving the game could be. Now there is a skill tree too. Now Liza P had a skill tree as well, but I wasn't a huge fan of that one. I really don't care too much for the skill trees in Souls games, but this one somehow actually works. The skill tree in this game is really good and the upgrades are really helpful along the way. Yeah, so we have a skill tree that's actually useful. You're going to use this throughout. It's going to help you on your journey for sure. Now, it is a tough game, as I mentioned before. There's a ton of bosses in the game that have huge health bars, and several of them even have second phases. Now, there's a parry and a block system. We're going to talk about the parry system later. The block system's pretty straightforward. You could basically block with whatever shell you pick up, and there's a ton of variety shells you can pick up, by the way, that all have different skills. Now, as far as blocking goes, if you time it right, we'll talk about the parrying a little bit later. There is a big payoff there. There's a posture meter like any other game. I'm not a huge fan of the posture breaks in this game because they're not as helpful as in other Souls-likes and Souls games themselves, but it is still useful to knock an enemy down. Defeating certain enemies also will give you rare items, and the loot system is pretty cool too. I like the loot system. It makes it very rewarding to go out, explore every area, and pick up what you can pick up because odds are it's going to help you. And now there is some ridiculously challenging bosses. I wanted to show this one off. This is probably, I don't know, a mid-game boss somewhere early in the mid-game. I'm not sure how far I am in. This boss was pretty difficult. Took me several tries, had a lot of hard-hitting attacks, and overall was something that I really had to learn throughout the boss fight before I was able to take him down. Which is basically the staple of most Souls and Souls-like games because we're always looking for that challenge. We want to have to fight a boss several different times before we get it. We want to have to learn the mechanics of the game too. Now you collect shells along the way, as I mentioned, and they all have different abilities too. By the way, you can get shell insurance, which means you could use your shell and take it out of any what is essentially the bonfire of the game. Now, like any Souls-like game or Souls games themselves, there's of course shortcuts you'll unlock along the way, which are incredibly helpful. Because of course we got to have shortcuts, and trust me, when you're playing this game, it's challenging enough to where you're going to need those shortcuts. Now, stowaways here are basically your talismans if you're familiar with games like Elden Ring and whatnot, where you can just kind of increase different things by putting them in these slots, and then adaptations give you more power and stuff you can do with your special abilities. Something you may notice right up here on the screen is, of course, you got to catch this, the sands between. This game knows what it is, it's aware of what it is and what it's influenced by. Now, parrying is very different in this game because it involves releasing a button instead of hitting a button. I know what you're thinking, Matt, why is that different? Well, trust me, it's going to take you a second to get used to because you have to hit the block button first, and then you have to release that block button at the right time, which you can send back projectiles or parry a regular attack to add imposter damage. It amounts to more fun because it's just something different that they added for this. Now, for the special abilities, I have the can here. You can use bubbles, which are really helpful. There's different things you can do with your special abilities, and they can be really useful when you're fighting regular enemies and bosses. Yeah, we have the bubbles there. They do a lot of damage to some of the bosses in the game. I actually like the soda can as a shell. Again, you're going to pick up random shells throughout the game. They're all going to have different abilities. There's a ton of different shells, and honestly, the shell system as a whole never gets old. And then there's going to be platforming throughout the game. So if you're not the best at platforming, now the platforming is pretty forgiving overall, but if you're not the best and you generally don't like games that involve a lot of platforming, this is a game that does have platforming throughout the entire game, which a lot of Souls and Souls-like games do have. And for me, I got used to it really quick. I'm not the best at platforming in Souls game. For those that follow my Elden Ring videos, they know that I've fallen a pretty good amount of times overall, and even with this game, it feels forgiving. Now, finding the essential bonfires of the game, which are these moon snail shells, is really rewarding, and they're spaced out well. Final rating for this game, I'm about 6, maybe 8 hours in, and I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. This is a really good Souls-like game. It's on Xbox Game Pass at the current time that I'm making this video too, so that's really helpful for people that are on Xbox. Overall, though, is it worth it at all, like throughout, buying it or whatever? Yeah, it is worth it. This game is worth it. I had a lot of fun with Lies of P. I had a lot of fun with this game too. It runs really smooth too. This is a very, very enjoyable game.